y'all know, I love y'all more than a really good book because I just paused this book that's in the middle of it so that I could film this video. Hello, my lovely friends, it's Margaret. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to be talking about everything that I read in February. Historically, February has always been a pretty good reading month for me. I didn't end up reading as much as I have read in February's past, but I did really enjoy everything I read, and I did read more than I have been reading in recent months. I was much more motivated for various reasons that you'll see as we go on. Just the quick stats, I read 9 books this month. Of those books, I read 2 fantasy, 3 contemporary, 2 historical fiction, 1 science fiction, and 1 memoir. And then I had 4 5 stars, 2 4 stars, and 4 5 stars, 2 3 stars, that's 6, yeah, and 3 3-star books. I never said math was my strong suit. The first book that I read in the month of February was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is the illustrated edition. I listened to this on audiobook. This is about Fitz. He is the son of the crown prince in this land. However, unfortunately for both the prince and Fitz, he was born out of wedlock, and so he is a bastard, kind of brings shame on the family name, blah, 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 blah. Long story short, his father abdicates his position as heir and hands it to his younger brother, and so Fitz ends up kind of getting drawn into a lot of the court politics as his uncle is ascending to the throne. There's a lot of plots. A lot of this is Fitz's coming of age story. It's him learning all of these various skills that he is going to need as a bastard in the king's court in order to survive and be useful to the crown. There's a lot of political intrigue if that is something that you like. Yeah, it is twisty and turny and so many things that are going on. I gave it 5 stars. It kept me hooked from pretty much, not necessarily the beginning, but like you get like not too far in and suddenly you're just like, okay, but what's gonna happen to this kid? What all is going on? All of the court politics and the things happening in the world start getting involved, and so you're just like, oh, things are happening. And it's really weird because it's both a slow book and a fast book, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Part of a trilogy, so there is a lot going on here that just draws you in, and not a lot of it gets resolved because there are 2 more books. I'm fine. One of the things that I really like about Robin Hobb's world building, about her story, about this book in particular, is she keeps everything really simple. It was really eye-opening to see that you can have a very simple world building. You don't have to create new words. You just have to create people and still have a really rich world, political system, story. I would say that this is just as rich as some of those other epic fantasies that you think of with like the complex, ridiculously, charting them on a wall, that's the word, charting them on a wall with yarn, kinds of magic systems that you're trying to figure out. Everything in this is very simple. This was a book that I read for my Fablen TBR game. You will find that I read most of the books that were on that TBR. The next book that we are going to talk about also fulfilled one of my Fablen quests, and it was also a pick that I did for Blackathon, which happened last month in February. That is Where the Rhythm Takes You by Sarah Doss. This is a retelling of Persuasion set in Tobago. It's about Raina and Aiden, who have known each other for children. Aiden has been spending his summers on Tobago with his grandfather for many, many years until they kind of have this fallout very shortly after they start dating. Anyways, Aiden is back with a group of friends who are visiting the island and visiting specifically Raina's family's resort. So things get real awkward real fast because they're like, we need a tour guide, and guess who they pick? This was a really well done retelling of Persuasion. The author did several things really, really well. First off, she did a fantastic job of adapting the original Persuasion story to a group of teens that are just freshly out of high school. I thought it was really realistic. I thought the things that Raina was worrying about and her concerns and everything that she was caught up in, I thought that was so well wrapped together, along with her own feelings about the hotel and the baggage that comes with because of her mother and other things that have happened in her past. I also think that the way that Sarah Doss adapted a lot of the Persuasion stuff was really well done. Like, she just knew which parts to keep what was most integral to the story, which in the original is Anne and Wentworth's relationship. She, like, just took those and, like, got rid of the rest, was not beholden to the rest, and she created this wonderful, really rich, fantastic retelling. This is one where she does a really good job of pulling me in, bringing me into the setting, and really giving me an idea of what Reina's life is like and what her day-to-day things are going on and how just this is out of the norm. I also think that there was and I can't get into it, but there was a really good balance between Reina and other things that had to do with Reina. I'm sorry, I don't know how to explain this without fully, like, spoiling certain things, but there are certain things that the author does a really good job of getting across so you understand, perhaps before Reina does, her feelings about certain events in her life, certain plans that she has for her future. I don't want to get spoiled. It was done really well, okay? It was just really well done, and you'll have to take my word for it. Isn't that literally what people do when they pick up books on the recommendation of a booktuber, is like, take their word for it? Okay, so I just realized that only one of these books that I have in this stack was not on my Fablen TBR for February, so I'm only going to tell you, like, the rest of them they're all Fablen picks. Fantastic for me. I read, like, 8 out of the 9 that I was supposed to read. And yeah, we're just gonna keep moving on from there. The next book that I finished was one of the group books for the Curious Minds book club. If you've not heard of the Curious Minds book club, the basic gist is every other month you read one fiction, and one non-fiction. There will be more information up here, but the book I read was Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. This is set in Victorian England. It follows Audrey Rose. She wants to be a coroner, I believe it is. Like, she is in a society where it's not usual for women of her station to do things that get their hands dirty, but she is fascinated by medicine, by dead bodies. It's something that she wants to do with her life. So currently her uncle is working with Scotland Yard. He's the current, like, I guess what would be a coroner there. He does a little bit of, like, dissection or autopsying bodies. He does a little bit of, like, tinkering, experimenting, those kinds of things, because he is a doctor. He does a little bit of investigating, like that kind of thing. It is actually really accurate to some of the techniques that were used at the time. The author did a really good job of doing that. I'm on a tangent, but just hold on, put a pin in that. Author does a really good job of the forensic part. Historically, Audrey Rose and her uncle end up getting drawn into the murders of the women in Whitechapel that were killed by Jack the Ripper. All in all, I liked the story. I liked Audrey Rose as a main character. I think she does a really good job of wanting to be accepted by society and trying to fit into that society, but also knowing that she has interests outside of what normal girls her age are. It's not like a either or kind of situation. She wants to be able to be a lady and wear fancy clothes and be nice, but also be able to go and dissect a dead body without anyone thinking it's weird of her. Spoiler alert, Audrey Rose people still kind of think people who dissect dead bodies are weird, but more women do it now. I liked Audrey Rose as a main character. I liked the way that we are taken through the murders of these women. I liked the fact that Audrey Rose's focus is never on the, it is on the murderer to some extent because she wants to stop these murders, but her main thing is these women are being murdered. That's the thing that upsets her the most. She's not drawn into it because she's like, ooh, this mysterious murderer who's doing these horrible crimes. She's like, these crimes are terrible and I don't want any other women to be subject to them. She draws a lot of really interesting lines, like between herself and these women, knowing that like the only thing that protects her really is most likely her privilege. I will say the romance took some time to grow on me, and there are a couple of reasons to this. Number one, it was just like a little ridiculous at times. There was a lot where like the kicker is they've known each other for a while through this book because these murders did happen over the course of several months. So they've known each other. I wish we had seen a little bit more of the build of their relationship because it's kind of felt like we were skipping to places in their relationship instead of seeing like some of the, like, it just wasn't as smooth as it could have been. I would have liked to see a little bit more. That said, I do like the relationship. One of the things that I really like about it is that he is one of the few people that doesn't have any expectations of her other than she be smart and not do dumb stuff. I will say, like, every time I got to the point where he was growing on me, he would open his mouth and say some really dumb, just foolishness. He would say some foolishness, and I just be like, sir, I understand that this is coming from a place of deep hurt and you are covering up certain feelings, but can you not? 5 out of 5 to Audrey Rose. Thomas gets 3 stars right now, but I do think that there's a lot of room for this series and these characters to grow on me. Yeah, I think that the author did a really good job. Carrie Maniscalco did a really good job of balancing what was realistic with the ambitions that Audrey Rose had and still fitting them within the expectations of Victorian society. That said, she messed, and this is part of why it got 3 stars. It might have gotten 4 stars, but she messed with some of the history for reasons that I do not understand. And not like if this was a historical fantasy, blah, 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 maybe that could have worked. But, like, she changed around some of the dates. And I can see maybe why she might have done that. Because it would have, like, maybe put more distance between certain things that happened than she wanted for the flow of her story. But again, like I said, I feel like we could have done with a little bit more of Audrey Rose and Thomas interacting. So I think that we actually could have worked around having all of those moments kind of maybe spaced out a little more. I don't know. I don't know why she changed the dates, but it bothers me. It really does, because I can't, like, she didn't give, like, she gave reasons for some of the things she changed. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. If you wanted to give that kind of, like, you wanted people to be able to experience that part of Victorian life, and you kind of moved a couple of things up, but, like, changing the, I don't understand. I don't understand. I'm just saying she could have worked around it, and I don't think it would have changed the story that much. The next book that I finished was The Kindred by Alicia Dow. This is Alicia Dow's sophomore novel. It follows The Sound of Stars, and it's set in sort of the same universe, but it happens earlier than the events in The Sound of Stars. It follows Joy and Felix, and they are part of a system where when people are born, every person gets what's called a kindred, which basically means you have a chip in your head so you are able to communicate with someone of a different class from you. It's always someone who is richer linked with someone who is poorer. There is a kerfuffle that happens, and Felix gets in trouble, which then puts Joy in danger. So he grabs her, and they're trying to get away and get somewhere where they can kind of figure out how to get out of this situation that they are in, and they crash land on Earth. And it was nice to read this because it is an Earth that has gotten past COVID. So, at least some people still have hope. I liked this. I didn't love it as much as I loved The Sound of Stars. There are parts of this that I think it felt like she didn't quite have as strong a grasp on Felix and Joy's voices. They tended to bleed together for me, whereas Morris and Ellie in the first book, they're very distinct. It didn't feel quite as intimate. It felt like we could have done this in third person versus first person, which is what this is in. I think part of it had to do with the world building and how she was trying to create a world that was parallel to ours, but also, like, not Earth. And I think, like, there's just a lot of things that I don't think were handled as well in this book as they were in the last book that she did. Still did really like the relationship between them. Kind of think Joy maybe could have smacked Felix a couple of times, but that's just, like, given him, she was not as strong as I would have been in some of my wording on a few occasions, because the boy is sweet. He is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. He has all of the best intentions, but is also very, very, very ignorant of his privilege as someone who is part of the royal family and comes from a very rich family versus Joy, who comes from a very poor family. I thought that she did a really good job of, like, the plot was good, the characters were interesting. I just didn't feel like she did as good job with the writing this time around as she did in The Sound of Stars. I still do highly recommend this. It's a really fast read. It's a really fun read. I think that there are a lot of conversations and cute moments that cute moments that happen between Joy and Felix that really just, like, are heartwarming. Once we get to Earth, I think that Alicia Dow did a fantastic job with not only, like, introducing but building the side characters that we get in this novel. There's, like, the bad guy, whatever, like, I don't care about the villains anyways, so he's kind of milquetoast, he's okay. There's a lot going on there that we won't get into, but they end up making friends on Earth, and their friends are just wonderful, and I love them, and I totally understand, like, why we would die for them. I also kind of get the feeling that there is a certain way that Alicia Dow likes to end her books, and it's interesting to me that she chooses to do them this way. I just realized I forgot to put Ruin and Rising back in its spot, but I live in Florida, so you can't, like, have gaps in your books because they start to warp. That brings us into a weekend word nerdathon, and I only finished one of the books that I set out to start that weekend, but that was the plan because the other book I was like, we're waiting till March because I don't have to have it read till March and I still want it fresh on my mind. But I did read The Beautiful Struggle by ta-Nehisi. This got 5 stars. This is a memoir about Coates' life up to the time that he is 18. It is primarily about him and his father and their relationship and how the environment that Coates grew up in shaped him, how it affected his father. Like, there are a whole lot of different, like, things that are in play with this book, and it is so, like, it's really good. He tells you about his dad and his life growing up and his mom and all of the things that are happening around him. He says all of that in such a conversational manner that, like, it feels like as you are reading this book that you're just sitting down over coffee with a friend who's just telling you about parts of his life. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to why he is going through this, why he is talking about it, but I think that it is a really, really good book. I think that it is really interesting the way that he examines his father's perspective and its impact on him. We don't get a lot of necessarily his beliefs and his perspective, but we get how he was shaped by his dad. Zero regrets here. This was quite possibly the best book I read all month. I'm not even kidding. Like, quite possibly. I'm gonna change that to most definitely the best book that I read. The next book that I read was East by Edith Pitot. This was a retelling of East of the Sun, West of the Moon. That is a retelling of Cupid and Psyche, and the basic gist is you have a young girl who ends up getting kidnapped by a white bear because he needs a young woman to live with him for a year. And so he asks her to go with him, and she goes because he is offering things to her family, and they go and live in his castle, and then she accidentally sees him while he is human and not a bear, but that's not supposed to happen. Basically, he's cursed, and he's trying to break a curse, and she can't see his human face, or she will... Wait, the curse will not be broken, and he has to go and marry a troll queen. In the original, it was the troll queen's daughter, and I feel like in the original, there maybe was a little more conversation between the two of them. There were a lot of issues I had with this, and I gave it 3 stars. It does not hold up as well as it did the first time. And I remember really, really liking the original East of the Sun, West of the Moon. I love the story of Cupid and Psyche, but this just, like, I don't know. I feel like in the originals, there's maybe less questions of consent, but when you're in the character's head and they're talking, like, there are just some questions of consent going on that I was just like, I'm not comfortable with how the narrative is brushing over them. And I also feel like some of the best parts of East of the Sun, West of the Moon, which is her having to kind of do these tasks, and it's a lot, but like there's a whole thing where she has to go through and kind of put some effort into finding him. And I feel like, I mean, they did a good job of doing that, but it was different than what was in the original myth. And so I don't feel like that was one of the things that was interesting about it, was the different people that she had to meet along the way and do things. Granted, I am basing a lot of this on the movie that I watched as I was when I was a child, which is like the Polar Bear King or something like that. I don't remember, and not as much on the original myth because I don't remember that much of it. It was okay. We had some points of view. I don't understand why we had them. I'm going to be entirely honest, because it wasn't just Rose, our main character, and the white bear. We also had the troll queen, which that made a little bit of sense, but then we also had her brother for some unknown reason, and I don't know why, because I don't feel like it added anything to the story. I am ragging on this book. I don't think it's a bad book. I think that it is pretty decently written. I just think that there are several flaws in it, and looking at it from 2021, there are just things that I wish could have happened differently, and maybe some conversations, maybe a little bit more, again, like nothing happened, but it's still a situation where I feel like I would have liked for there to be a conversation that Rose is aware of what's going on and why it's happening, to at least given the chance to say yes or no to a few things, not just the going off to live with the polar bear. Like, that made sense. She got to make a decision on that. That was her decision. There are other things that happened that I was just like, this raises some concerns in my mind. Y'all are gonna think that it is terrible. I'm just like, it's okay. After that, we had The Forest of Stolen Girls by June Her. This was the book that you guys told me I needed to, like, I gave you 3 options and y'all said this is the one you're reading. So this is about Hwani, and she is going back to the island that she was born on, Jeju, because her father has disappeared in pursuit of a case. Dad was called to Jeju to find out what is happening to the island's girls. They are going missing and no one can figure out why. Like, it's more than, the families at least believe it's more than just they're running away. It's just, it's weird. It's happened in a very short period of time and it might be involved with the case that kind of drove her family from Jeju. The main character, Hwani, is going to kind of go back in her father's footsteps because he has gone missing. And he's been missing for almost a year, and the police chief, they basically closed the case. They're not going to be looking for him anymore, and so she decides, because her father has taught her a little bit about his work, she decides that she is going to go and find out what happened to him. June does such a good job of drawing the reader in to the world that her characters inhabit. One of the other things that I really like about June is that she does a really good job of picking women or having protagonists that are involved in professions that aren't like the big 3 that you see in historical fiction, which are the maid, the wife/mother, and the prostitute. Like, she does a fantastic job of showing you that even though women's options were limited in some of these historical settings, they were not as limited as we tend to believe they were. She did a really good job with the mystery of this and the twists and the turns. The main protagonist in this novel does a lot of circling around things because she can tell, like, it's very realistic in the fact that, like, you can tell something is off, but she can't quite figure out, like, she can't quite put her finger on it, so she has to keep returning to certain things that she already knows. I also, like, don't mind that June like, I did mind in the first one, but this one I didn't mind as much. But I think it's because this is mostly about Hwani and the relationship between her and her sister, but I didn't really mind that there was no romance. That's a really weird thing for me to be able to get on camera and say. Like, I wasn't mad that there was no romance in this book. I thought it actually worked out really well, and I actually would have loved to have a sequel. I highly recommend any of June Her's work at this point. I mean, I can't vouch for The Red Palace yet, personally, because I haven't read it, but I have a feeling it's going to be a very good book. If I didn't say, I gave that 4 stars. The next book that we're going to be talking about is another one of my Blackathon picks, and that is Excuse Me While I Ugly Cry by Joya Goffney. This is the one that was supposed to fulfill, what was it? It's the book on the cover and then romance between 2 black characters. This is about Quinn, and she has this notebook that she keeps lists of, like, everything in. It's kind of, I guess, a coping mechanism for a little bit of anxiety that she has. It might just be a coping mechanism because she's a teenager in her final year of high school and a lot of stuff is happening, and who, like, that's a lot even without any mental illnesses, and I think that everyone should have some sort of support through that because just, that's a lot. Anyways, this notebook with some very personal lists goes missing, and she thinks it's this boy Carter who was the last person to have her notebook because they accidentally swapped notebooks. They're the same, basically, apparently. And then someone starts blackmailing her with one of the lists in it, because it's like her to-do list before she goes to college, and they want her to complete that list for reasons that she does not understand, but she thinks it's Carter because he was the last person to have her notebook, and so she's like, I know it's you, and he's like, to prove that it is not me, I am going to help you find it. There's a lot, there's so much more than, I know that sounds like very simple and basic, but like there is so much going on for this poor girl, and her parents are not helping. I really like this. I gave this 5 stars. It was cute, it was sweet. I loved the way the relationship between Quinn and Carter develops. I liked a lot of the interplay between Quinn, a lot of the discussions that are had, and it was really nice to see Quinn kind of expand her friendship group, I guess, because that's what happens in this book. She really does, like, it's about, there's so much growth that Quinn goes through in this. I liked the way that they kept you kind of guessing with what was going on with the notebook and who might have had it, and I liked the fact that, like, we got to see Quinn go through these different experiences as she's trying to check off items on this list that she was never planning on checking off, but she's trying to complete some of them in an efforts to get this blackmailer to not tell her parents certain things that are in this notebook that she does not want them to know. I also thought that this was the secret that she is keeping from her parents was a really interesting secret. Like, it makes, for a high schooler, it makes perfect and total sense, but it is also not, I feel, where most YA authors necessarily would think to go. Like, I think that there are a lot of people who would write this kind of book and it would be a very different secret. And the final book that we need to talk about is the Avengers Initiative Reading Challenge group book for the month, which was No One Here is Lonely by Sarah Everett. This is about Eden, and she just, I thought it was her best friend, but it turns out it's just like a boy that she's known for a while and had a crush on for a while. He dies in a car crash. And we start about a week after that has happened. And she's not dealing with it well because she kind of felt like things were just about to start happening between them, and there's a lot. And so she ends up getting hooked up with this kind of app, I guess you would call it. It's called In Good Company, I think. It doesn't say on the back of this book, but basically there is a digital copy of this boy's, like, mind, and so you're able to call it and talk with them, and they will respond how the person who they are copied off of would respond. It also kind of has a little bit of, like, you get to kind of mold who they are because they're there to comfort people, and so they are going to make themselves who the person that's calling in needs them to be. Little weird, little creepy. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I thought it was really well done. I thought that this was another one where we take a character who is just going into their final summer before they start college, and it really does a good job of figuring out where this person would be mentally, did a really good job of showing them as they're trying to kind of be an adult, but still very much still being a teen, like still having the perspective that they had in high school. Eden's goals are very, like, immediate. They're very, like, near future. She's not necessarily thinking about what's going to be happening 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So in some cases, not even next year. She's thinking about what's going to be happening. I also like the discussions that it had about Eden being from this very high-achieving family. She's the middle child, not just, like, in birth order, but also in what she wants to do with her life, because she has no idea, and yet she has an older sister and a younger sister who are very talented at things, and she's just like, well, I'm just here being mediocre, and I found that super relatable. Another thing that it had is it had this really cute little, like, childhood friends to lovers romance that I want a sequel, okay? I just want to see where that goes because I think it would be really sweet and cute, and it was wonderful. I thought it was wonderful. A little complicated since she's also still kind of talking with this dead boy that she had a crush on. But that's kind of like, that's what the plot's for. That's a plot point, Janet. It's a plot point. I liked the writing style. I liked the fact that the author does not shy away from how our minds work when we are not in a great place. And I also like the fact that the author did not try to make her really mature and adult, because she is not a character, like, she's not a character that necessarily would be. Alright, so for favorite, we are going to go with The Beautiful Struggle by ta-nehisis. So this just was such an experience. Like I said, I think this is the best written book that I read this month. Like, it definitely, like, of all of them, the most, like, it's just so well crafted, it's so well delivered, and I highly recommend that you read it. For least favorite book, I think it's going to come to no one's surprise that I am saying East by Edith Pitot. It is by no means a bad book. It was an enjoyable read. I liked most of it for the most part. It just did not hold up to what I thought it was, and where I am now, I'm just like, I'm not as okay with some of this stuff as I would have been in, I think. When did this come out? This came out, oh Lord, sorry, did I just show you my phone number? Yes, I do put my phone number on the inside of my books. Okay, this came out in 2003. So, and I probably read it around 06, 07, somewhere around there. So yeah, early 2000s. It doesn't hold up as well. Now it is time, if you're feeling chatty, to tell me what your favorite and or least favorite book of February was. I would love to hear that down in the comments. If you are not feeling chatty, but you still want to let me know that you watched to the end of the video, go ahead and leave me a cloud emoji, since the last book we talked about was No One Here is Lonely. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, if you're interested in what I need to read for Fablen for March, go ahead and check the video up top, and I will have whatever the newest video on my channel is down here. That is it for now, my friends. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye! I love it when your battery says that it has a full charge at the beginning of filming, but then dies like 10 minutes in. Sorry, Cap, I did not mean to knock you down.